Welcome back. Today's viewer story, sent in by Eleanor Vance, is about the moment a devoted mother discovered she was just an ATM to her son and daughter-in-law. It started when they forgot her birthday, but the true battle began when Eleanor uncovered their shocking 5-year plot to have her declared incompetent and steal her entire fortune. Get ready to witness the ultimate comeback. Have a story of family betrayal? Email us at womenstoriess@gmail.com. Now, let's start the reckoning. My name is Eleanor Vance, and if you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how we got to this point, because the devil's in the details. And honey, this devil has some serious bite. 3 months ago, I was what you might call a devoted mother. Scratch that. I was a doormat with a platinum credit card. At 65, I'd been playing bank manager for my adult children for so long, I'd genuinely forgotten what it felt like to utter the word no. My late husband, Frederick, left us very well off when he passed 7 years ago. Comfortable enough that our son, Christopher, and his wife, Vivian, could easily afford their luxurious, a non-disclosed name lakeside retreat, their kids' exclusive international school tuition, and Vivian's insatiable collecting habit. She wasn't into shoes. She collected vintage, a non-disclosed designer watches. I lived quietly in my spacious and non-disclosed city penthouse, the same one Frederick and I had shared for 35 years. Every weekend, I'd take the non-disclosed highway out to their place for mandatory family brunch. Every major holiday, I'd send a hefty wire transfer. Every birthday, anniversary, or minor achievement, I'd open the family trust fund without question. I thought I was fostering security and demonstrating unconditional love. Turns out I was merely financing an extravagant performance. I thought I was being generous. Turns out I was being systematically exploited. The warning signs had been there for over a year. Christopher stopped initiating conversations unless he needed an immediate solution, usually financial. Vivian wouldn't even pretend to be engaged during my visits. She was constantly on conference calls with her interior designer, planning the next phase of their sprawling compound or haggling with a non-disclosed auction house for another timepiece. My grandchildren, Scarlett and Ethan, 13 and 15, were polite yet utterly detached, treating my presence as an awkward contractual obligation rather than family time. But I chose to ignore it all, blinded by the notion of family loyalty. I genuinely believed love required sacrifice. I truly believed that if I just gave enough, did enough, they would eventually see my worth and appreciate me. What an utterly naive fool I was. The day before my 65th birthday, I had gone shopping at a non-disclosed name gourmet market for ingredients to make Christopher's favorite Earl Grey and lavender cake, a complicated, multi-layered recipe I'd only made for him since he was a child. I spent 3 hours in the kitchen, my hands stiff with carpal tunnel, struggling with the delicate layering process, but determined to create something special, something tactile that would remind him how much his mother treasured him. I texted him that morning, a simple message. The special cake is ready whenever you want to stop by. No response. I waited all day. Every time a car slowed outside, I'd peek through the blinds, hoping to see their large black, a non-disclosed luxury car pulling into the private drive. Every time my phone chimed, my heart would leap, thinking it was him calling to apologize for the delay. But the hours ticked by relentlessly. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon bled into evening, and evening brought another sleepless night, spent staring at the ceiling, wondering where I had failed. The Earl Grey and lavender cake sat untouched on my pristine marble counter for 3 days, growing stale and brittle, a perfect physical metaphor for my rapidly fading hope. On the 4th day, I scraped it into the disposal, fighting back a bitter surge of tears as I washed Frederick's favorite serving plate. That was the moment of devastating clarity. My own son, the one I had dedicated my entire adult life to supporting, had not just delayed his wishes. He had completely forgotten my birthday. I had spent 4 decades prioritizing everyone else's needs. When Christopher divorced his first wife, I helped fund his entire startup capital for his new venture. When he married Vivian, I paid for their sprawling, a non-disclosed name Mediterranean honeymoon. When they couldn't afford their massive down payment, I wired $350,000 without blinking. And this was my return on that investment. Utter silence on the single day that should have mattered most. I was pouring myself a second, unnecessarily strong cup of a non-disclosed coffee brand coffee when my phone finally buzzed. Christopher's name appeared on the screen. For a fleeting moment, my heart performed its traitorous leap of hope. The message read, "Hey, Mom, happy birthday. Sorry it's a few days late. You really should have reminded me about it." I stared at that message for a full 10 minutes, reading it repeatedly, feeling a cold, hard, unyielding stone settle firmly in my chest where warmth and maternal affection used to reside. Should have reminded me. As if it were my duty to manage his filial obligations, as if I were some random service provider rather than the woman who had brought him into the world. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The old Eleanor, the doormat, would have typed something saccharine like, "Oh, don't worry about it, sweetheart. These things happen." The old Eleanor would have instantly excused him, probably offering to reschedule a grand compensatory dinner. But the old Eleanor had died somewhere between scraping that beautiful cake into the garbage and reading his utterly pathetic non-apology. Instead, I called my lawyer. "James Peterson," I said calmly. He had managed our family's complex legal and financial matters for 2 decades. "I need to make immediate and drastic changes to the family trust arrangements." There was a noticeable pause. James knew the extent of my financial support to Christopher. "Eleanor, what on earth prompted this decision?" I almost laughed, the sound dry and humorless. "What prompted it, James? Let's just say 20 years of being taken for granted. A birthday forgotten like yesterday's trash, and a text message that finally clarified my true value to them. I've simply had a sudden and complete change of perspective about family obligations." James worked with a professionalism I deeply appreciated. By Tuesday afternoon, all automated payments to Christopher's accounts had been immediately suspended. The large monthly wire transfer that covered their mortgage, the lease payments on the luxury car, and Vivian's substantial a non-disclosed credit card company bills simply stopped flowing. I didn't tell them. Why should I? They had never once asked where the money came from, nor questioned whether I could afford their breathtakingly expensive lifestyle. They had never once expressed true gratitude for bankrolling their American dream. Instead, I waited. And for the first time in years, the weight lifted from my shoulders. It was a strange, empowering feeling. I finally held the cards instead of constantly folding. It took exactly 6 days for the carefully constructed facade of Christopher and Vivian's life to show its first hairline fracture. I was reading a fascinating biography on my favorite author, comfortably nestled in my armchair, enjoying a rare cup of a non-disclosed herbal tea and the blessed silence of my own thoughts when my phone started its frantic assault. Christopher's name and a picture of his overly polished profile flashed repeatedly on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't rush. The weight of holding the power for the first time in years was almost physically enjoyable. He called again, immediately, then again. By the fourth call, I was genuinely amused. Where was all this frantic urgency when it came to remembering the day I had endured 26 hours of labor to bring him into the world? The fifth call came with a text message, short and demanding. "Mom, please pick up. There's been some kind of major mistake with the bank." Mistake? That's what he called it. When the steady, reliable gravy train finally slammed into a wall, it was merely an error. The audacity was breathtaking. I poured myself a glass of expensive, a non-disclosed wine brand Cabernet Sauvignon and settled back into my chair. Let him sweat a little. Lord knows I'd sweated plenty over the years, wondering if I was doing enough, giving enough, being enough for a child who couldn't be bothered to remember my existence outside of a financial context. The calls kept coming, 7, 8, 9, each one more frantic than the last. By the time I went to bed that night, Christopher had called 29 times. Vivian had called 7. They had left a total of 16 voicemails, each one more panicked than the last. The first few messages were confused and slightly patronizing. "Mom, I think there's been a banking error on your end. Can you call your people back?" By message 7, confusion had turned to worry, laced with an underlying demand. "Mom, please call us. The mortgage payment bounced and we need to figure out what happened immediately." By message 12, worry had escalated into pure, unadulterated panic, directly from Vivian. "Eleanor, this is Vivian. We need to talk now. The A Non-Disclosed credit card company cards have been declined at a non-disclosed high-end store." The very last message, left at 11:59 p.m., was pure desperation. Christopher's voice was strained, thick with exhaustion and panic. "Mom, I know you're still angry about the birthday thing. I am genuinely sorry, okay, but this isn't funny anymore. Please call me back. We need that money to fix this." We need that money. Not we miss you, or we're worried about you, or we love you. Just we need that money. Perfect. After all these years, he had finally distilled our relationship down to its singular, ugly truth. I was a resource, not a relative. I turned off my phone, placed it face down on the nightstand, and slept better than I had since Frederick passed away. The next morning brought a new, jarring experience. The sound of someone pounding rhythmically and violently on my penthouse door at 7:15 a.m. I took my time getting ready, choosing a comfortable cashmere sweater and my favorite antique pearl necklace. If Christopher and Vivian wanted to have this conversation, I was going to look dignified while I had it. Through the peephole, I could see them both standing in the hallway, looking utterly harried and desperate. Christopher was pacing, running his hands through his perfectly coiffed hair. Vivian stood rigid, clutching her a non-disclosed designer handbag, like it was the only thing stopping her from dissolving into tears. Their exhaustion was palpable. They looked like children who had suddenly realized the world didn't actually revolve around their immediate needs. I opened the door, a serene, pleasant smile fixed on my face. "Good morning, dear. What brings you by so early? You usually reserve these early morning trips for your ski vacations." Christopher didn't waste time on pleasantries. He pushed past me into the apartment. Vivian followed with a face like a dark, gathering thunderstorm. "Mom, what in God's name is going on?" Christopher demanded, turning to face me. "The bank says all automatic transfers from your trust accounts have been suspended. Our mortgage payment bounced yesterday, our luxury car leases are late, and the A Non-Disclosed credit card company called us about non-payment." I closed the heavy oak door and turned to face them. "Would you two like some coffee?" I asked pleasantly, walking toward the kitchen. "We don't want your damn coffee, Eleanor," Vivian snapped, losing her carefully crafted composure instantly. "We want to know why you've cut off our money without warning." Our money. How utterly fascinating that Vivian believed money I had earned, inherited, and managed was somehow theirs by inherent right. I walked to the kitchen and began preparing the coffee anyway, deliberately taking my time grinding the beans and adding the filtered water. Let them watch me move at my own unhurried pace for once. "I've been doing some thinking lately," I said conversationally, over the gentle hum of the coffee maker, "about family dynamics, financial responsibility, basic human courtesy, and, things like remembering extremely important dates." Christopher had the grace to look deeply uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "Mom, if this is still about your birthday, I said I was sorry, okay?" "Oh, it's about so much more than that, Christopher," I interrupted, turning to face them, leaning against the counter. "Your birthday was merely the final dramatic stroke of the brush. Do you know how long it's been since either of you asked how I'm doing? How I'm feeling? Whether I need anything?" They stared at me blankly. "I'll tell you," I continued, the calmness of my voice cutting through their panic. 18 months. 18 months since either of you treated me like a person instead of a conveniently located ATM. Vivian stepped forward, her face flushed with genuine anger, not just panic. "That's not fair. We invite you to family dinners every Sunday. You invite me to dinners where you promptly ignore me while discussing renovations I'm paying for, vacations I'm funding, and private school tuition I'm subsidizing," I countered smoothly. "I'm not a guest at those dinners, Vivian. I'm the entertainment, the dotty, overly generous old lady you tolerate because she writes the checks." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Christopher sat down heavily on one of my antique velvet parlor chairs, the fight visibly draining out of him as the cold realization hit that I wasn't bluffing. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice pleading, "I know we haven't been the most attentive lately, but cutting us off completely, that's truly extreme." Extreme? Coming from the person who had forgotten his mother's birthday and then blamed her for not reminding him? Is it extreme, Michael? Let me put this in perspective for you. I walked to my desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a simple, well-organized folder. "Is it extreme, Christopher?" I repeated, holding the folder I'd retrieved from my desk. "Let me put this in perspective for you." I opened the folder and placed the contents, a meticulously organized printout of wire transfers and expense logs, on the glass coffee table between us. The sight of the organized data seemed to stun them more than my anger ever could. "In the 7 years since your father Frederick died," I began, my voice calm and analytical, "I have given your family $985,000 in direct, documented support payments alone. That figure," I tapped the sheet with a manicured finger, "does not include special holiday bonuses, emergency funds for your business venture in a non-disclosed country, or the original $300,000 to $50,000 down payment on your oversized house. We are talking about nearly $1 million in cash transfers intended purely for your monthly comfort." Vivian went utterly pale, her perfect composure finally dissolving into genuine fear. I don't think she or Christopher had ever bothered to add up the cumulative total. They treated the money like an endless, naturally occurring resource. "In return," I continued, meeting their horrified stares, "you visited me exactly 40 times for those mandated Sunday brunches. If we do the math, that comes out to roughly $24,625 per visit. I have attended 18 family events where I was visibly marginalized or treated like a decorative obligation. That's about $54,722 per event, where I was made to feel unwelcome." Christopher finally opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand, stopping him mid-syllable. "I'm not finished. You have called me to ask about my health, my interests, or my well-being exactly 9 times in 7 years. 9 times, Christopher. But you have called to ask for money, specifically, or to solve a financial crisis, 51 times. The numbers hung in the air like a heavy, undeniable accusation, because that is exactly what they were. An indictment of their priorities. The entire financial arrangement we had, I said, leaning back into my chair, my posture radiating control, was based on the fundamental principles of family love and mutual respect. When you stopped providing the love and the respect, I simply stopped providing the money. It's not cruelty. It's simple, corrective economics. Vivian found her voice, high and trembling. You can't just abandon your family because your feelings got hurt, Eleanor. That's vindictive. I looked at this woman who had meticulously spent my money on antique watches and had barely acknowledged my existence for years. I am not abandoning anyone, Vivian. I am simply requiring the same basic courtesy I have always extended to you. Acknowledgement, appreciation, basic human decency. If that is too much to ask, then perhaps we need to reevaluate what the definition of family truly is. Christopher leaned forward, his voice taking on the manipulative, wheedling tone he had used as a child whenever he desperately wanted a new toy or permission to stay out late. Mom, please, we can do better. We will call more, visit more. But we need that money now. The house, the kids' schools, everything depends on it. Everything you've built depends on my generosity, I corrected him, firmly maintaining the frame of the conversation. And generosity requires gratitude, not entitlement. I stood up, smoothing down my sweater and walking toward the grand bay window overlooking the city. I'm going to make you both a proposition. From up here, the busy people below looked like ants scurrying around with their urgent, self-centered purposes, much like my son and daughter-in-law were about to do. Here is my offer, I said, turning back to face them, my expression unreadable. You have 45 days, not 30, but 45, to show me that I am more than just a funding source for this family. This cannot be done through desperate phone calls or panicked visits, but through genuine, unsolicited interest in my life as a person, Eleanor Vance, not just as mom or source of funds. Christopher and Vivian exchanged a quick, knowing glance, and I could see the calculation whirring in their eyes. They were already strategizing, figuring out the shortest path to manipulate me back into opening the trust fund. What exactly does genuine interest mean? Vivian asked carefully, trying to pin down the metrics. It means treating me like family instead of like a non-disclosed financial institution. It means remembering important dates without being reminded. It means asking about my day, my health, my interests, my feelings. It means including me in conversations instead of talking around me. It means showing basic, unprompted respect for the woman who has been subsidizing your entire lifestyle. I sat back down, enjoying the way they were forced to hang on my every word for once. If, after 45 days, I feel genuinely valued as a person, rather than just a provider, we can discuss resuming some level of financial support. Not the unlimited blank check arrangement you've enjoyed, but something structured and reasonable. Christopher's face brightened with renewed hope. We can do that, Mom. Absolutely. You'll see. We'll be amazing. But, I continued, holding up one index finger, pausing for maximum effect, if I detect even the slightest hint of manipulation, if this feels like a performance designed purely to restart the flow of money, the offer is permanently and irrevocably withdrawn. And I do mean permanently. Vivian's mask of composure slipped dramatically. "What are we supposed to do in the meantime, Eleanor? We have massive mortgage payments, the car leases, the children's tuition is due. The same thing millions of responsible families do," I said pleasantly, shrugging slightly. "You will figure it out. Christopher makes a decent six-figure salary. You could get a job, Vivian. You could downsize the house to something you can actually afford. Change the children's schools. You know, all the things people do when they choose to live within their actual means." The word job seemed to physically pain Vivian. She had married Christopher straight out of a non-disclosed Ivy League university and had never worked a day in her life. The idea of actual employment was visibly terrifying to her. "You're being incredibly cruel," she whispered, her voice laced with outrage. "Am I?" I questioned, standing up, the universal signal that the meeting was over. "Or am I finally being honest about what this relationship has truly become?" 45 days, I repeated, walking toward the door. "Starting now. And remember, I've had 7 years to perfect the art of detecting genuine emotion versus calculated performance. Do not insult my intelligence by trying to fake your way through this." They left without another word, Vivian practically vibrating with impotent fury, Christopher looking stunned and utterly lost. After they were gone, I poured myself the glass of wine I'd promised myself and settled back into my chair. The next 45 days were going to be very interesting indeed. The phone calls started the very next day. Not frantic, panicked demands this time, but carefully crafted, almost theatrical performances that would have impressed the director of a non-disclosed Broadway show. "Hi, Mom. Just calling to see how you're feeling today. I just realized we never ask about your health enough." Christopher's voice was syrupy sweet through the receiver. I was standing in my kitchen preparing a light lunch, and I nearly laughed out loud. In 7 years, this man had never once called to inquire about my health, unless he was making insincere small talk immediately before asking for a substantial wire transfer. "I'm perfectly fine, Christopher. How exceptionally thoughtful of you to ask." "Great. And hey, I was thinking maybe we could have lunch next week, just the two of us. Like old times at that bistro near a non-disclosed park." Old times. When exactly had we ever had regular lunch dates? I couldn't recall a single instance of Christopher suggesting we spend time together without Vivian or the children acting as buffers or conversational shields. "That sounds truly lovely," I said, curious to observe just how far they were willing to take this charade. "Perfect. Oh, and Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday about not appreciating you enough. You're absolutely right. We've been terrible family members." The script was almost insultingly transparent in its effort to please, but I played along. "I appreciate you saying that, dear." After he hung up, I checked my antique clock. 47 minutes later, Scarlett called. My 13-year-old granddaughter had never, under any circumstance, initiated a phone conversation with me in her entire life. Our interactions were limited strictly to polite, monosyllabic responses when I asked her direct questions during family brunches. "Hi, Grandma Eleanor. I just wanted to call and tell you all about my day at a non-disclosed international school." The words sounded painfully rehearsed, as if she were reading cue cards held just out of frame. Poor child. Her parents had clearly coached her meticulously on precisely what to say and what details to include. "That's wonderful, Scarlett. Tell me all about it," I encouraged. She launched into a meticulously detailed account of her advanced physics classes, her new friends, and the school's upcoming a non-disclosed charity drive. Everything was wonderful and amazing, and she just couldn't wait to share it all with her beloved grandmother. It broke my heart, honestly. Not because she was lying, but because this forced, unnatural conversation starkly revealed how little we actually knew about one another. Her parents had weaponized their own daughter, turning her into a desperate pawn in their calculated, dangerous game. When she finished her forced performance, I spoke gently. "Scarlett, sweetheart, you truly don't have to do this." "Do what, Grandma?" she asked quickly. "Pretend to be so intensely interested in talking to me because your parents told you to call." There was a profound, extended silence on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was much smaller and far more genuine. "Dad said you were mad at us, that maybe you wouldn't be our grandma anymore if we didn't try harder. Those bastards. They had actually terrified their own children into performing this manipulation." "Scarlett, listen to me very carefully," I instructed. "I will always be your grandmother, no matter what happens between me and your parents. That will never, ever change. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Grandma." "Good. Now, do you actually want to talk to me about your day? Or would you rather go do whatever 13-year-olds do when they're not being forced to call their grandmothers?" She giggled, a genuine, unrehearsed sound, and for the first time, she sounded completely like herself. "Can I go? I have a huge history assignment." "Of course you can go, darling. I love you, Scarlett." "Love you too, Grandma." The manipulation had officially begun, but at least I had managed to pull one child out of the direct line of fire. Day 5 brought flowers. An enormous, ostentatious arrangement of white orchids and exotic ferns arrived at my penthouse door with a card that read, "Thinking of you always. Love, Christopher and Vivian." I'd never received flowers from them before. Not for my birthday. Not for Mother's Day. Not even when Frederick died. But now, when they needed my immediate financial security, suddenly they were thoughtful enough to spend $400 on a massive, tasteless display. I placed the orchids on my dining room table and waited for the inevitable follow-up call. It came within an hour. "Hi, Mom. Did you get our little surprise?" Vivian's voice was unnaturally bright. "They are lovely, thank you," I replied neutrally. "I just wanted you to know how much we truly appreciate everything you've done for us over the years. I know I haven't always been the best daughter-in-law, but I genuinely want to change that." The best daughter-in-law? This woman had barely spoken to me in 2 years, except to make occasional snide comments about my classic style or my simple cooking. "That's very kind of you to say, Vivian. I was wondering if you'd like to go shopping this weekend," she gushed on, completely ignoring my tone. "Maybe browse for a new watch for me, or perhaps get our nails done at a non-disclosed spa. We could have a true girls' day." A girls' day with the woman who once told Christopher I was too needy when I'd called to check on them during a major regional blackout. "I'll certainly think about it," I said, ending the call before I was tempted to tell her precisely what I was thinking. Day 8 brought a handwritten letter from Ethan, my 15-year-old grandson. His usually abysmal handwriting was surprisingly neat, strongly suggesting he'd been made to write multiple drafts. "Dear Grandma Eleanor," it began, "I have been thinking about how amazing you are and how I don't tell you enough. You are the best grandma in the world, and I love you so much. I hope we can hang out more and do fun, intellectual things together. Love, Ethan." The letter was sweet, but it reeked of highly structured parental coaching. Ethan had never used the word intellectual in his life, and he'd certainly never expressed any desire to hang out with me outside of a Christmas morning gift exchange. I called Christopher that evening. "The letter from Ethan was very touching," I said. "Oh, that was all his idea, Mom. He's been feeling really bad about not being closer to you. He has a brilliant heart, that boy." "Christopher, stop lying to me. I know you coached him to write that letter just like you coached Scarlett to call me." Silence. "Mom, I don't know what you—" "Stop. Just stop. If you want to rebuild our relationship, it has to be based on honesty, not on performances, not on manipulations, not on scripted phone calls from confused children. You're trying to show me you care, but you're only showing me you can follow a script when money is on the line. There's a difference." I hung up, feeling profoundly exhausted. This wasn't working the way I had hoped. Instead of inspiring genuine change, I was merely watching them dig themselves deeper into contemptible deception. But I had given them 45 days, and I was a woman of my word. I just wasn't sure how much more of their amateur theater I could stomach before the deadline arrived. 2 weeks and 4 days into their meticulously planned, though poorly executed performance, I discovered something that didn't just change everything. It redefined the entire game. I was having lunch with my closest friend, Margaret Holmes, at our favorite exclusive cafe near a non-disclosed gallery, when she leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper. Margaret is brutally honest and fiercely loyal, which is why I value her opinion more than anyone else's. "Eleanor," Margaret began, her expression carefully neutral, "I ran into Vivian at the A Non-Disclosed Country Club yesterday. She was quite the topic of conversation." I waited, a knot forming instantly in my stomach. "She was telling everyone, quite convincingly, I might add, about your recent cognitive decline," Margaret said. "She implied you'd been acting highly erratic since Frederick passed, making impulsive, financially questionable decisions that were jeopardizing the children's future." My cup of Earl Grey rattled against the saucer as I placed it down with unnatural care. "What exactly did she say?" "Apparently you've become difficult to manage, and they are gravely concerned and reluctantly considering having you evaluated for competency issues." The words hit me with the calculated force of a physical blow. While they were sending me overpriced orchids and rehearsed affection, they were simultaneously and deliberately laying the groundwork to have me declared mentally unfit. "Margaret, are you absolutely certain of this language?" I asked, my voice steady despite the seismic shift in my reality. "Dorothy, I've known you for 30 years. You are the most sharp-minded, financially astute person I know." But Vivian was masterful. She had several women nodding along sympathetically, lamenting the tragedy of poor Eleanor losing her grasp and having to be protected from herself. I spent the rest of lunch in a chilling daze. When I returned to my penthouse, I immediately made the call that needed to be made. "James," I said, bypassing all pleasantries the moment my lawyer answered, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely and utterly honest with me without legal filtering. Has anyone, specifically Christopher or Vivian, contacted you recently asking about my mental state or financial competency?" There was a long, heavy pause on the line. James knew the legal implications of such a question. "Eleanor, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't disclose a conversation with a family member, but given the severity of this query—" "Yes. Christopher called last week. He said he was concerned about some unusual financial decisions you'd been making. He specifically asked about the legal process for having someone's competency evaluated." My hands, which had been perfectly steady moments ago, began to shake uncontrollably. "What did you tell him, James?" I told him unequivocally that you were completely competent and that any such evaluation would likely be a monumental waste of everyone's time and money. But Eleanor, the fact that he asked, I know what it means, James. It means the flowers and the fake interest were not an attempt to win me back. They were evidence collection. After I hung up, I walked straight to the dining room table and stared at the massive arrangement of white orchids they had sent. Every delicate bloom, every green leaf suddenly looked like a lie. Every act of forced affection was part of an elaborate 5-year-long deception designed to make me look emotionally unstable when I inevitably rejected their calculated affection and cut them off. They weren't trying to gain my forgiveness. They were building a case against me. The carefully orchestrated phone calls, the sudden interest in my well-being, the children's letters. It wasn't love. It was premeditated evidence. Evidence that they were caring, attentive, concerned family members, dealing with a difficult, irrational, and impulsively punitive old woman who had cut them off without proper cause. The revelation should have crushed me. Instead, it filled me with a cold, clear, laser-focused fury, a calculating vengeance that I hadn't accessed since I was young and willing to fight dirty to build my life with Frederick. They wanted to play games. Fine. But they had tragically forgotten that I had been playing this game, the high-stakes game of corporate strategy and legal maneuvers, much longer than they had, and I was, quite frankly, a master strategist. I spent the entire weekend planning and gathering my resources. By Monday morning, I knew exactly what steps I needed to take. First, I called James and scheduled an immediate appointment for a complete mental competency evaluation with the most respected neuropsychologist in a non-disclosed metropolis. Eleanor, you truly don't need to, James began, still concerned. Yes, I do. When this is over, James, I want irrefutable, ironclad documentation that I am of sound mind, fully capable of making every single one of my own financial decisions, and that I acted with deliberation. Next, I made a difficult but necessary call to Christopher. Mom, how are you feeling today? The fake cheerfulness in his voice was beginning to grate on my nerves like sandpaper. Actually, Christopher, I said, keeping my voice soft, warm, and highly convincing. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our recent conversation, and I've decided you're right. Right about what, Mom? The hope in his tone was immediate and nauseating. Right about resuming the financial arrangements. I've been too harsh, too emotional, and frankly, I miss our family dinners. I miss being an involved part of your lives. I want to repair this. The sheer, palpable relief in his voice was intoxicating. Mom, that's absolutely wonderful news. I knew you'd come around. You are such a loving, generous person, truly. I want to have dinner this Friday, I continued, sounding contrite. At your home, all of us, including Scarlett and Ethan. I want to apologize properly for being so volatile and discuss how we can move forward reasonably. Of course. Vivian will be so relieved. She's been worried sick about you. I'll bet she has. That afternoon, I made another, more crucial call to a private investigator named Patricia Chen, someone James had recommended years ago for discreet corporate matters. Mrs. Vance, Patricia said, her voice brisk and efficient. Patricia, I need to know absolutely everything about my son and daughter-in-law's current financial situation. Bank accounts, credit cards, assets, debts, detailed spending patterns, and especially if they have been consulting with any new specialized attorneys recently. Something Patricia feels profoundly and structurally off about their behavior. Patricia had done preliminary work on my family during Frederick's business disputes, so she had existing files and contacts. Her updated comprehensive report arrived Thursday morning, and it revealed a depth of desperation and calculated malice that was far worse than I had initially suspected. Patricia Chen's updated financial report landed on my desk Thursday morning, confirming my deepest fears and revealing a shocking level of desperation. Christopher and Vivian weren't just struggling financially, they were drowning in structural debt. Beyond the obvious enormous expenses I'd been covering, the mortgage, the tuition, the luxury cars, the report detailed massive credit card balances. Vivian's antique watch-collecting habit and extravagant spending were far more severe than I'd imagined, exceeding a non-disclosed high figure in unsecured debt. They owed outstanding balances on both their leased vehicles, had taken out a risky second mortgage on the non-disclosed name lakeside property, and were severely behind on Ethan's international school tuition payments. But the most damning and professionally interesting discovery was an obscure bank account I had never been aware of, an account at a regional bank named A Non-Disclosed Regional Bank. This account showed a peculiar pattern. Large sums of my money, transferred monthly, were being deposited, held for less than 48 hours, and then immediately withdrawn or transferred out before they paid their standard household bills. Why would they do that? The money I provided was clean, tax-free, and intended for direct expenses. Why bother moving it through a separate, unnecessary account unless they were meticulously planning to obscure its origin and flow? The answer arrived in the form of financial planning documents Patricia had uncovered from a specialized estate law firm. Documents that clearly showed Christopher and Vivian had been actively working with an attorney to establish temporary guardianship over my assets since shortly after Frederick's death. The plot had begun not in the last 2 weeks, but 5 years ago. It started right after the funeral, when I had been grief-stricken and making large, sometimes impulsive, financial gifts to cope with my profound loss. The gradual distance, the increasing financial demands, the casual cruelty, and the recent efforts to paint me as erratic. It was all designed to establish a pattern. The generous but emotionally unstable widow who needed protection from her own poor judgment. I thought I was teaching them a lesson about basic respect and gratitude. They had been playing a much more dangerous, longer, and more calculated game of financial elder abuse. The revelation didn't bring anger. It brought a cold, terrifying calm. I had thought I was fighting a battle of manners. I was actually fighting a battle for my freedom and competency. Friday dinner was going to be the confrontation. I arrived at Christopher and Vivian's house precisely at 7 p.m. They had gone all out for this performance, using their most expensive non-disclosed tableware brand china, polished silver, and an obscene number of candles. The atmosphere was thick with forced intimacy and the desperate smell of a non-disclosed expensive meal preparation. "Mom, you look absolutely radiant," Vivian gushed, rushing to embrace me, though her hug was stiff and insincere. "That dress is so flattering on you." I was wearing the same conservative black silk dress I had worn to Frederick's funeral 7 years ago, a dress she had specifically mocked years ago. "Thank you, dear. You look lovely as always," I replied, maintaining my serene mask. Christopher raised his glass of premium, a non-disclosed wine brand Chardonnay, which, ironically, I was the one who had paid for. "I want to make a proper toast tonight," he announced, his voice thick with fake sincerity. "To family, to reconciliation, and to Mom for being the most generous, loving woman we know." To Grandma, Scarlett and Ethan chorused, and their enthusiasm, blessedly, seemed genuine enough to make my heart ache for them. We made it through the elaborate appetizer and main course with their performance in full swing. They asked about my health, my hobbies, pretending to remember my passion for rare books, and my plans for the upcoming holiday season. They laughed at my carefully selected anecdotes, complimented my antique jewelry, and treated me exactly like the beloved family matriarch they had never once considered me to be. It was, I conceded, a masterful piece of sustained amateur theater. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been fooled into restoring the funding immediately. After dessert, a beautiful but sickly sweet-tiered cake they must have bought, I stood up, signaling the beginning of the end. "I have something I want to say to all of you," I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the table. Michael and Nora leaned forward instantly, anticipation gleaming in their eyes. They were clearly anticipating my tearful apology and the promised restoration of their funds. "These past 4 weeks," I began, letting my gaze sweep slowly over the table, "have been so enlightening. Christopher, your sudden interest in my daily health has been touching. Vivian, your invitation to go shopping was so thoughtful. And children, your letters and phone calls have meant the world to me." They were practically glowing with success. "It has made me realize how much I've been missing," I continued, adopting a tone of vulnerability. "How important it is to be truly involved in each other's lives. And that's exactly why I've decided to be much more actively involved in managing all of our affairs." Christopher nodded eagerly. "Exactly, Mom. That's what we've been trying to show you." "Which is why," I said, pausing and letting a cold smile touch my lips, "I met with James Richardson yesterday to restructure the final terms of the family trust documents." Vivian's perfect smile flickered, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor of concern. "I also had a complete psychological evaluation done just to make absolutely sure I'm making sound, rational decisions." I watched as Christopher's face went completely pale. "The result? A clean bill of mental health," James assures me. "As it turns out, I am completely competent." I pulled the documents out of my A Non-Disclosed designer handbag, the private investigator's report, the competency certification, and a detailed copy of their guardianship planning documents, setting them squarely on the table between us. "And finally, I hired a private investigator to do a thorough financial review of your accounts. A very thorough review." Tuji. The silence in the room was now absolute, deafening. "Did you know it's illegal to attempt to establish financial guardianship over someone through fraudulent means and elder abuse? James was quite concerned when he reviewed your planning documents." Vivian stood up abruptly, her chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "I don't know what lies you think you've been told. I found 5 years' worth of evidence that you've been systematically setting me up to be declared incompetent so you could control my assets permanently," I interrupted, my voice rising slightly for the first time. "The secret bank account, the guardianship paperwork, the false witnesses you've been cultivating at the country club who can testify to my erratic behavior." Christopher's voice was barely a whisper, filled with the fear of a desperate man caught red-handed. "Mom, it's not what it looks like, really. Because it looks exactly like fraud. It looks exactly like elder abuse. It looks exactly like 2 people who decided it was easier to steal from me than to earn their own living." Scarlett and Ethan were staring at their parents with wide, horrified expressions. The performance was officially and tragically over. The air in the dining room solidified into a chilling silence, broken only by the sound of Vivian breathing rapidly, her chest heaving beneath her expensive silk blouse. Christopher remained seated, paralyzed, his gaze fixed on the dossier lying between the remnants of their celebratory cake. I stood tall, the cold clarity of my own planning now giving way to the righteous power of the truth. "Here is precisely what is going to happen," I continued, my voice calm, authoritative, and utterly devoid of maternal warmth. "First, you are both going to pack up and vacate this property, your so-called dream house, by the end of the month." I let the weight of the statement sink in. This house, the one I paid the $350,000 down payment on, the one whose mortgage payments I have been covering for 5 years, is technically a financial asset of the Vance Trust, and it will be immediately sold, which means I can legally evict you whenever I choose, and I choose now. Vivian's face was a study in pure, unadulterated shock and fury. "You can't do that!" "Where are we supposed to go?" "The same place millions of people go when they can no longer afford their lifestyle, Vivian," I countered, looking directly at her. "You will figure it out. You will move into a smaller rental. You will sell one of your A non-disclosed luxury cars." I turned my attention to Christopher, whose shame was now too profound to disguise. "Second, you are both going to get jobs. Real jobs. The kind of work where you exchange time and effort for money. You will stop leveraging my generosity and start living within your actual means." The word job clearly pained Vivian again, even more than the eviction. "Third, and listen to this part very carefully," I warned, allowing a hint of steel to enter my voice. "If you ever attempt to contact me again, via phone, text, email, through friends, through your children, or via any legal maneuvering, I will immediately file criminal charges against both of you for attempted financial elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy." James assures me that with the collected evidence, the guardianship documents, the hidden bank account, and the testimony from my own recent competency evaluation, we have more than enough to proceed. Scarlett and Ethan were still staring at their parents, their faces mirrors of horrified comprehension. The truth, stripped of all performance, was devastating to witness. Christopher finally managed to speak, his voice thin and pleading. "Mom, please, don't involve the children. We can do better. We can call more, visit more. We'll stop the guardianship plan, I promise. Just don't cut off the money. The kids' school is due. Their future depends on it." "Everything you've built depends on my financial desperation to be loved, Christopher," I corrected him, refusing to yield to his last-ditch manipulation. "And that foundation is permanently dissolved." I walked over to the door, retrieved my coat and handbag, and paused, turning back one final time for the ultimate blow. "Oh, and one final piece of information for your financial planning." Christopher and Vivian looked up, their eyes wide with a desperate, lingering hope that perhaps I was about to offer them a financial lifeline. "I am officially changing my will next week. The entire estate, the full A non-disclosed high value, which you incorrectly believed was only $47 million, all of it will now go directly to the A non-disclosed charity, specifically funding literacy programs for disadvantaged youth." The color drained completely from Christopher's face. He knew the immense finality of that number. "Congratulations, Michael," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Your greed, your entitlement, and your 5-year-long conspiracy just cost you and your children every single penny of the Vance family fortune. The same fortune you thought you could simply steal through fraudulent guardianship." I opened the heavy oak door. The cool night air rushed into the stifling dining room, symbolically clearing the stale atmosphere of deceit. I looked at my son one last time, recognizing only a stranger. "Goodbye, Christopher." I walked out, closing the door behind me, hearing the faint, muffled sound of a chair violently scraping the floor as I stepped into the elevator. The drive home was eerily peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt a deep, profound sense of freedom. The burden of being the family ATM was lifted. Some life lessons cost more than others, but watching my son and his wife learn that respect, honesty, and gratitude aren't optional, they are the price of admission to a relationship, was worth every single penny I had risked. I arrived back at my penthouse, poured myself the most expensive aged glass of single malt scotch Frederick had left behind, and settled into my armchair. The battle was over. My voice mattered, and my self-respect was finally restored. The phone calls started again within the hour of my departure, but this time they held a raw, desperate edge that was purely about survival, not manipulation. The frantic demands for an immediate reprieve crashed against the wall of my silence. I had left my phone off during the drive home, savoring the tranquility. When I finally powered it on, the screen lit up with an astonishing barrage of attempted communications. Christopher had called 47 times between 9 p.m. and midnight, alternating between furious demands and pathetic, tearful begging. Vivian had called 12 times, her voicemails escalating from threats of legal action to pleas citing the children's instability. I listened to one message from Christopher, recorded around 11:30 p.m. His voice was hoarse and cracking. "Mom, please, you can't do this. We're ruined. The house payment is past due. They'll seize the non-disclosed luxury car. I'll do anything. I'll apologize properly. I'll visit twice a week. I'll be a better son. Just, please answer the phone. We need that money to stop the inevitable." The message solidified my resolve. The fear wasn't for me or for our relationship. The fear was solely for the loss of their entitled comfort. I turned the phone off again and poured a second, smaller measure of scotch. The battle was won, but the cleanup, the legal and emotional disengagement, was just beginning. The next morning, I called James Peterson. "Good morning, James. I trust you've had a busy night," I said, my voice steady. "Eleanor, you've created a crisis of seismic proportions. Christopher's office has been calling since 6 a.m. They're demanding the trust be reinstated immediately." "It won't be," I stated. "I need you to proceed with the asset protection plan we discussed. Immediate steps to change the will, permanently sever the trust's connection to Christopher's family, and begin the eviction process on the A non-disclosed name Lakeside property." "Understood. The will restructuring is already underway. We can have the eviction notice served by the end of the week. Legally, the house is yours to sell. And James, I need you to initiate a formal cease and desist notification, advising both Christopher and Vivian that any future contact outside of legally mandated court proceedings will be met with the filing of criminal charges for elder abuse." "That's a strong deterrent, Eleanor. It will certainly solidify your position." "Good, because I'm no longer interested in teaching them a lesson. I am interested in establishing an impenetrable boundary." While James handled the legal fortifications, I began the painful personal reckoning. I contacted the international school and quietly informed them that the trust would no longer be covering Scarlett and Ethan's tuition. I then called their longtime headmistress, Mrs. Davis, and explained, without betraying the children, that my circumstances had changed, and the family would need to seek a more affordable educational environment. I transferred a small, private sum, enough to cover their current semester without their parents knowing, to an escrow account managed by James, ensuring the children wouldn't be immediately withdrawn mid-term. It was the only compromise I was willing to make for the grandchildren caught in the crossfire. I also made a point of calling my friend Margaret. "Margaret, I need you to do me a favor. If Vivian attempts to contact you or any of our mutual friends again, Please tell her you spoke to me and that I have retained legal counsel and secured a clean bill of mental health." "Done, Eleanor," Margaret replied instantly. "I'll make sure the country club knows the truth. They'll drop Vivian like a hot stone." The real emotional toll came from the children. 2 days after the confrontation, I received a carefully worded, emotional email from Scarlett. It was clearly written without her parents' direct coaching, filled with confusion and sadness. "Grandma, Dad, and Mom are fighting all the time. They said we might have to move. What did they mean when they said you were cutting them off? Dad says you're angry because of a business deal. I just don't understand." I wrote back immediately, ignoring James's legal advice about no contact. This was my grandmotherly duty. "My dearest Scarlett, I love you and Ethan very much, and that will never change. Your parents are dealing with some very serious financial responsibilities that they need to learn to manage themselves. This is not about anger. It is about them taking responsibility for their own choices as adults. The problem is between me and them, and it has absolutely nothing to do with you or your brother. I want you both to focus on your studies and know that you are deeply loved. You are safe. You will always be my granddaughter." It was the most honest conversation I had shared with anyone in the family for years. The next call I received was from Christopher's office manager, a nervous young woman named Brenda, who claimed Christopher had collapsed during a meeting and was in the emergency room at a non-disclosed hospital. The old Eleanor would have dropped everything and raced to his side. The new Eleanor, however, calmly called Patricia Chen. "Patricia, I need you to confirm Christopher's location and current status at a non-disclosed hospital. Be discreet." 10 minutes later, Patricia called back, her tone dry. "Mrs. Vance, Christopher is indeed at the hospital. He is in the lounge, pacing and drinking an expensive, a non-disclosed juice brand smoothie. He appears to be trying to look pale and distressed. No medical emergency has been filed. It was his final, desperate theatrical attempt to regain my sympathy and access to the funds." I smiled, a genuine, cold smile of triumph. They were out of plays. They were out of moves. They were simply out. The 47 phone calls and the fake collapse confirmed everything. The relationship was purely transactional. And now that the transaction was permanently canceled, the pretense of affection was abandoned entirely. I was finally free of the burden of the doormat. The next month was defined by quiet, meticulous reorganization. The frantic noise from Christopher and Vivian eventually subsided, replaced by a sullen, defeated silence. The realization that I was not bluffing, that the financial door was permanently sealed, finally set in. The legal process moved swiftly. James Peterson efficiently finalized the sale of the non-disclosed name Lakeside property, which, due to the severe debt they had accrued, barely covered the outstanding second mortgage and the cost of the aggressive eviction process. They were forced to move into a small, nondescript rental unit in a non-disclosed suburb, a stark, humiliating contrast to their former lavish lifestyle. Vivian, unable to cope with the reality of responsibility, was rumored by Margaret to have attempted a few days of online work before quitting in histrionics, claiming she was too high profile to manage basic administrative tasks. Christopher, facing bankruptcy at his over-leveraged venture, was forced to take a salaried position at a non-disclosed corporate firm, a massive step down from his former entrepreneurial status. My focus, however, was not on their failure, but on my own renewal and the protection of the innocent. I met with James to review the final draft of my new will. Every asset, every share, Every piece of real estate was meticulously directed to the A Non-Disclosed charity, with a significant portion specifically allocated to the Frederick Vance Foundation for child literacy. A powerful legacy for my late husband, whose passion was education. I signed the documents with a clear mind and a profound sense of satisfaction. The estimated A Non-Disclosed High Value fortune was now officially beyond the reach of my entitled offspring. The other crucial part of rebuilding was securing the future for my grandchildren, Scarlett and Ethan. I arranged a confidential three-way meeting with James and the headmistress of their private school, Mrs. Davis. "Mrs. Davis," I explained calmly, "my son and daughter-in-law are experiencing a sudden and severe financial downturn. They will be unable to pay the tuition for Scarlett and Ethan beyond this current semester." "That is a shame, Mrs. Vance. They are both excellent students," Mrs. Davis replied, clearly prepared for this news. "I understand. However, I want to ensure they complete their current academic year without disruption. I have established a non-traceable anonymous scholarship fund through the A Non-Disclosed Foundation to cover the remaining months of the year, provided they maintain their grades. The purpose is to shield them from the stress of an immediate transfer, giving their parents time to adjust." I was determined to give the children the stability their parents had shattered, but without giving Christopher and Vivian any leverage or knowledge of the funds. The scholarship would be managed entirely by the school and James, bypassing their parents completely. My own life became deliciously quiet. I rediscovered the joys of my own company. I returned to my passion for collecting rare first edition books, joining a quiet, intellectual society near my penthouse. I began hosting small, intimate dinners for my loyal friends, like Margaret, where the conversation was genuine and the appreciation was mutual. One afternoon, I received an expected but painful call from Ethan. "Grandma, they sold the house," he said, his voice shaky. "We're living in a tiny apartment. Dad says it's because of you." I took a deep breath. "Ethan, your father is choosing to blame me for consequences that he and your mother created." I had to make a very difficult decision, Ethan, not to abandon you, but to protect myself and the family's integrity from being exploited. "But why?" "Because, sweetheart, they taught me that the only time they truly needed me was when they needed my money. And that, Ethan, is not love. Love is showing up when it isn't convenient. Love is remembering without being asked." I paused, then spoke the truth I needed him to hear. "I will always, always love you and Scarlett. I miss you desperately. But until your father and mother learn the difference between a mother and a bank account, I cannot safely have them in my life. I am sorry they have put you in the middle of this. It was cruel and unforgivable." The phone call ended in tears, his and mine. But it was a necessary separation. I had preserved their future inheritance through the foundation and guaranteed their short-term academic stability. Now, they had to deal with the immediate fallout of their parents' toxic choices. The final piece of the puzzle was the symbolic ending of my role as the doormat. I sold the black A Non-Disclosed luxury car I had bought 5 years ago, specifically to drive to Westchester every weekend. I replaced it with a smaller, understated electric vehicle, perfect for navigating the city. The change wasn't just financial or legal, it was spiritual. I no longer feared the ring of the phone or the demands of the mailbox. I was Eleanor Vance, the woman who had built a life, not the woman who financed one. The quiet, profound strength I had shown in cutting off the parasitic growth had restored my dignity and given me a freedom I hadn't known since Frederick was alive. I now understood that sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is say no, not just to protect her money, but to protect her very self. 6 months passed, and the silence from Christopher and Vivian was complete. They had received the final cease and desist order from James Peterson's office, backed by the undeniable threat of criminal charges, and they finally understood that the stakes were real and the door was locked. The only communication I received was a terse legal note confirming the last of their outstanding debts had been resolved through the sale of the lakeside house. My world, once loud with demands and performance, was now blessedly quiet and filled with my own chosen pursuits. I had spent the last half-year traveling, visiting historic libraries in a non-disclosed European city, indulging the intellectual curiosity that my role as family financier had long suppressed. I understood that, while I had won the battle for my finances and sanity, the emotional damage was permanent. I had lost a son, but I had reclaimed Eleanor Vance. The real test came a few weeks after my return. I was having a quiet Sunday evening dinner with Margaret when my building's concierge called up. "Mrs. Vance, there is a large registered package for you, delivered by courier. It requires a signature." I brought the box up myself. It was heavy, wrapped in plain brown paper, and sealed with excessive tape. I opened it carefully, cutting through the layers of cardboard. Inside, resting on a bed of tissue paper, was the antique A Non-Disclosed designer watch that Vivian had collected 2 years prior, the one I suspected I had indirectly paid for. Tucked beneath the watch was a single sheet of paper, a letter written in Christopher's distinctive looping handwriting. It was not an apology. It read, "Mom, we received the notice about the foundation. I hope you are happy. This is the last thing you paid for. Don't expect to see the children again. We are teaching them who their real family is now." The coldness was breathtaking. Even now, facing financial ruin, he was incapable of admitting fault. The letter was a final, resentful stab at control and a threat to weaponize the children against me. I immediately called James. "James, I just received a letter from Christopher containing a veiled threat regarding the grandchildren. I want every necessary step taken to ensure their safety and well-being. I also want the children's former school informed discreetly that if their parents attempt to withdraw them before the semester ends, they are to notify you immediately." "Understood, Eleanor. We can issue a protective, preemptive order without naming the children publicly, establishing your deep concern for their welfare." As for the letter itself, I didn't let it linger. I carried it, along with the expensive antique watch, to the small industrial shredder I kept in my home office. I placed the watch on the desk. This artifact of Vivian's greed was now nothing more than an ugly, expensive relic. Then, I fed Christopher's resentful letter into the machine. It was reduced to confetti in seconds, symbolically severing the final thread of communication and control. I picked up the watch and walked to the window. I stared down at the street below, no longer seeing ants, but seeing people forging their own paths. I had built my fortune. I had built my life. They had attempted to steal it. The watch was a powerful reminder of the theft. I walked back to my safe, opened it, and placed the watch inside, not as a prize, but as a permanent, chilling souvenir of their betrayal. I would hold on to it, a tangible reminder of the day I stopped being a victim and started fighting back. I realized that the most satisfying outcome wasn't the financial freedom, but the clarity. I now lived without illusion. The shame wasn't mine. It belonged entirely to them. The Vance family fortune, now directed to the Frederick Vance Foundation, would do more good for countless children than it ever would have for my two entitled grandchildren under the care of their toxic parents. That was the real legacy. I had taken something intended to be corrupted and transformed it into genuine, lasting good. I ended the evening by turning on the camera and recording my final thoughts, the very monologue that opens this story. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I have found true freedom. The only true currency in life, I concluded, is respect. And sometimes you have to cut off the money to finally buy back your self-respect. What do you think of Eleanor's final move? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to submit your own true story confidentially to womenstoriess@gmail.com. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe.